was going to start with one of those awful cliches. We know you feel obliged to sort of say that the person we have with us here today needs no introduction at all. And of course, it's very obvious that Bernadette McAliskey doesn't need an introduction. But I can't think of anybody else in the room who deserves one more. And so it might be well worth sort of just recalling some of those greatest hits, one of which is the youngest member of Parliament, elected in 1969, and the following year, arrested for participating in the Battle of the Bogside. You've got to admire that in many ways. The other thing too is a long-standing campaigner for civil rights, prisoners' rights, travellers, single mothers, in fact, anybody who's sort of marginalised or dispossessed, you find Bernadette McAliskey by their side. The other thing I would sort of say is I've been reading your biography recently, which is out of print. I don't know whether anybody has a copy of it. Anybody got a copy of The Price of My Soul? Few hands go up in the dark there. It's a bit of a gem and really, really hard to come by. I was lucky enough to get a copy a couple of years ago on eBay at a very reasonable price. The price has become much inflated recently, but it's got to be due being republished, maybe a second volume as well. And maybe a screenplay, I think, wouldn't go amiss. She should think a little bit about who you'd like to play in the television drama or film drama of it. It's a wonderful book, and I think one of the things it illustrates about Bernadette is it's very easy to talk about politics in ways that are sometimes very abstracted from people's lives. But one of the things that she illustrates in the book, and I think she's illustrated throughout her life as an activist, is an ability to talk about politics in a very, very grounded way. So I'd ask you to put your hands together and give a very warm reception to Bernadette McAliskey, please. Okay. What I'm basically going to do is
I'm another one of those waves now. I just realised walking up the road that there was a vacancy for a wave, and it wouldn't look well on King Charles III. So before anybody else copyrights it, I'm practicing.
I'm going to ask a question to get things going, but I'm going to hand over to you as quickly as I possibly can.
Great.
Because
and feel free to throw Leila Doolan, my friend, there out. Because she's going to ask the most awkward questions of all. And so do you see the lady, see the heckler in the second row?
Yeah.
Don't, you know the way we spot the trot and you don't let them ask a question? just let on, she's one of them.
Yeah.
And we'll get the evening over well. I'm the only trot allowed to speak here tonight.
Well, that's what I was going to say. Is we'll take questions from the floor, but we want them to be questions. So if anybody looks like they're sort of building themselves up to a moment of great oratory, we will cut you off immediately for that there. But, I was going to come in with a very, very sort of easy question to sort of start with, and then I sort of thought there's only really one thing to talk about. I seen a thing on the, well, there'll be loads of things to talk about, but one place to sort of start. I was looking at an article in one of the newspapers, and a journalist has written something which sort of says that this is the end of the second Elizabethan age. And, it does come at a period of what is very clearly serious constitutional change. And you can sort of see that that's going to have consequences for England and Scotland and Wales and Ireland as well. Do you think Ireland is ready for it, or what does it need to do to prepare, do you think?
For the Queen being dead?
Well, no, I mean in broader constitutional terms, if this is the end of an age, and it does sort of feel to some extent like we're going through a period of constitutional change.
I think that's true. We are, by and large, courtesy of Boris Johnson, I think, and the Brexiteers of the Tory party. I think in the fullness of time, the way people think World War I started because somebody shot the Archduke Ferdinand, and you say, Christ almighty, it couldn't have been only that. But I think the Boris Brexit in the fullness of time will be that Duke Ferdinand moment on when the death of the United Kingdom as a union kicked off. I don't personally think there's any doubt about that. All the things that followed from that. I do think that if you were the Tories at the minute, you know that thing you could say, well, it could be worse, and then the Queen up and died. And it now is worse. And it is worse, and it is worse for them, because a whole lot of bits and pieces, and sometimes just that's the way history rolls. You know, people like to think they always shape history, but sometimes, you know, like Bernadette Devlin as a phenomenon is an accident of history, to my mind, and I think we are in that kind of run of the historical cards, that the circumstances in which things have happened, not all have been causal one after another, come together in that kind of perfect storm, which creates opportunities, whether people take them or not, whether we use them or not. I think in terms of Ireland itself, I think the constitutional changes, let me tell you, the constitutional conversations are already happening. The conversations about the reunification of the island are already happening. If you think the right wing are sitting waiting to see what Sinn Féin's going to do, they're not. If you think the owners and captains of industry are not already discussing what an integrated capitalist Ireland would look like, that conversation is well underway. What's not underway is that conversation amongst the citizens, that conversation amongst activists, that conversation specifically engaging the people who are most opposed to the idea, which are the loyalists of the North, and much less so that body of people described as unionists, which is just a marker rather than an ideology. All of those things are currently in flux, and I think that there is a need for the beginning of a transparent and open conversation, particularly amongst the left, amongst social activists, amongst those people whose focus is not nationalism and not inward looking, need to be shaping the conversation of what kind of a constitution we will have. If you're looking in terms of the other island, I do keep trying to tell them, because it is a big shock to the British system, they don't have a constitution. They have a monarchy. They have democracy by the grace of God and Her Majesty the Queen, now deceased. That's why they have to make a very quick transition. And they will have a king by 10 o'clock tomorrow morning, because they don't have a constitutional democracy. The monarch chose the Prime Minister yesterday. If she had said, I don't like the cut of Liz Truss, take her away from here, she couldn't have been. There'd have been what they call a constitutional crisis. The crisis would have been they realise they don't have a constitution. Because the Queen would have just said, fuck off. What would they have done? What would they have done? Now, Liz Truss will go down in history as a woman what killed the Queen. But things could be worse. So at a serious level, there will be, as a consequence of a number of those various things all happening in that kind of rapid succession, there will be a position of flux and uncertainty around the scaffolding of what constitutes the Union. And the impact for that for Ireland and Scotland and Wales is immense. but none of it is a given. And so the question for us is, what's our role in that? What have we got to say in answer to that question? What's our contribution to shaping the answer of that question? Around as well as the national question, the international question, the global question, and the climate question. Because there would be nothing more typically Irish for us to have got unification just as the water closed over our heads. just as the melting ice hit the top of Slieve Lake. And we'd all go down saying, at least we're free.
But that's, in a way, I mean, you mentioned the sort of the absence of a constitution on the other island, and we have one here. But you get a sense, don't you, that the sort of constitutions that were produced in a particular period in history, they're not really fit for purpose now. Sure, they're not in a world of climate change. So what would you envisage in that sense?
We need, one of the things that I think is very sad about the Republic of Ireland is that its citizens really know nothing about the Constitution except maybe a wee clause. Only when they know something really has to go, they read the Constitution as Berla, because most of them can't read it as Gaeilge, which is another national disgrace, but that they don't know the Constitution. So how can you effectively challenge a Constitution if you don't know what's in it? And of course, our current Constitution is not fit for. It's outdated for a start. It's not fit for purpose for the republic that you've got. Never mind, fit for purpose to be tweaked round the edges in a different context in which the jurisdiction of the state was expanded to cover the entire national territory. So you have to start, I think the conversation is a from scratch conversation. And there's a very simple template about constitutions. And here we go back to good old Thomas Paine for all his weaknesses. It hasn't changed a lot from that. It is up to to the people living on the island, if that's the administrative unit, if that's the state. It's up to the people themselves to discuss, debate, and determine and agree the principles by which they wish to live. That's the first question. That's the social contract, collective question that it is up to us to answer. Do we want to live in a society that cherishes all the children of the nation equally? So there's nothing wrong in a way with the aspirations of the Constitution, but the Constitution as it stands doesn't meet the aspirations. We don't cherish the children of the nation at all. Never mind, if there was any equality about it, we would be treating them all equally badly, because there are very few children who are treated well in terms of children's rights and children's needs, unless people are wealthy enough to protect themselves at the expense of others. So the constitutional question, I think, starts at the very beginning, and we should be having open discussions and debates around, if we're talking climate change, for example, how would we build a constitution that would protect our environment here without being at the expense of people elsewhere? How do we write that into the principles of government by which any government elected is constitutionally bound? Because the Constitution is what limits the government. It's where society controls the administrative unit known as government. And if we don't have a constitution that creates a scaffolding fit to carry the weight of the vision we have for the future, then we will end up with governments that will erode that vision in their own interest every time you elect them.
And you sort of say it's we already know that there are particular class interests that are working on that at the
they're
moment,
already
because evil
making
never
sure that
sleeps.
the next constitution doesn't take away the right of people to privatise housing while people live in the streets. Of course they do.
Do you think that there's enough being done there at the moment within sort of working class communities?
There's not enough being done. Certainly at the minute, let me tell you, in working class communities, there's not anybody thinking about the Constitution. Mm-hmm. They're thinking about how they'll get through this winter. Mm-hmm. They're thinking about how they will minimise the debt that they know they will acquire in order to survive with any modicum of dignity and sustainability. So the minds of the working class are at the minute almost totally based on survival over the next 6 months. And bearing in mind that this is 2022, this is Western Europe, and if you were in the north, you'd be part of the 6th wealthiest nation in the world, because India just overtook United Kingdom. That was enough to kill that old lady. That was enough.
Okay. Well, we'll take out maybe a question from the floor. I'm finding it very hard to see anybody here at the moment, so you'll need to wave vigorously. But remember what I said
Just
about
like this,
pontificating. Okay. Is there anybody wanted to ask a question? You're all going shy. Jeez, you were noisy enough coming in, let me tell you. Mm-hmm.
Where would you start, Bernadette? Okay, then, if it is a question of a constitution which we all know does not, in effect, carried out, you can't start with revising the constitution. You have to start. Where are you going to start then?
Well, I think there are a number of places you start, you can start with town hall meetings, like, the way that you can start a national campaign to, I'm conscious that those lights are on here because somebody's probably recording, so I shouldn't really be sitting talking like this, but I can't see who I'm talking to. But Leila, where I would start is, and I suppose it depends on who is doing what. Everybody doesn't have to be doing the same thing. But I think political organisations need to be politically thinking in the interest of their own particular stream of thought, ideology, or whatever you want to say. I think there is a duty within organisations politically to be addressing that question and to be addressing it transparently. And I know Chris from Sinn Féin is here, and so I'm going to say, for example, just pick on Chris, that Sinn Féin, because it's the single biggest oppositional party in the whole country. Now, when the peace was being debated, and and I had quite a number of criticisms about how that was organised, but it was organised. There were what were called family meetings. There was a meeting in almost every town, almost in every village, within the communities in the north where Sinn Féin had support, where the struggle had support. And the issue of the Downing Street Declaration, that document, were on the table, and people came to meetings like this here and they discussed it and argued it. I always remember Peggy Quinn from Carrickmore being a Tyrone woman. When Jerry Adams was speaking at the meeting, and she spoke and she said, Jerry, I am opposed to the Downing Street Declaration. I was opposed to it before I read it. And I only read it out of loyalty to the movement. And having read it, I'm still opposed to it. And she just sat down again. And I thought, good on you, Peggy, Tyrone to the fore. That'll be doing for now. But the important thing, Leila, was that those meetings were held and people were able to talk about them. And Sinn Féin took the leadership in that. And so when they came around to the acceptance of the Downing Street Declaration, which I didn't accept, but what I did accept was that those matters had been discussed, and I was a minority of people who didn't accept it. So that's one place to start. I think it is a responsibility of the southern state to initiate those citizen meetings and to initiate them and facilitate and resource them in a manner that allows oppositional voices to be heard. Now, those meetings have to be structured. If we're talking then about the women's movement, it is crucial within the women's movement that we have discussions from the perspective of gender equality as to what the Constitution would look like. If we're talking about the environmental movement, the same. So there's a responsibility on everybody who is organised to initiate those conversations now, so that we're not in a position, because the mechanism has been set out without a coherence, without a methodology. The mechanism is set out that at the point where it seems, that's not even clear what that means, but at the point where the Northern Ireland Secretary of State determines that there is a reasonable chance that a border poll in the north would carry a majority, a border poll will be called. You would have thought that the Secretary of State would have then called a border poll very quickly before anybody gets a chance to build a majority opinion. But I would argue that we are in the north not very far short of that position. We're not, for all kinds of reasons. That's not to say that because the mistake people think is that the number of people who might vote for a border poll is equivalent to the number of first preference votes Sinn Féin get in an election. Now, with the greatest respect in the world, Chris, you don't get my first preference vote any day. And you wouldn't expect that. Because politics are different. I vote for the person who's eliminated first. But having done that, I continue to exercise my vote to exclude the far right as far as I can. But I will vote yes on a border poll. I think there are many people within the unionist community. I'm not saying there'd be anything like a majority, but I think there is an overlooked minority of people in the Northern Unionist community who, post-Brexit, post the death of the Queen, post the bizarre experience that the British psyche has lived through with Boris Johnson, that the everyday decent, not so petty bourgeois person has a significantly less emotional, cultural tie to their unionism than people expect. So you're going to end up having, just about finished on that you're going to end up having to deal with reunification before before we all know what the position should be. And our best option is to start those conversations now so that we have an informed population voting in the border poll, and we have an informed population in the Republic, because we are not in any doubt that there is a significant part of the southern population doesn't want us. The joke in the north was that a game of high-class poker is being played for Northern Ireland and the loser has to take it. So
I was just going to say to you, at the moment, the way everything's going with, and you mentioned earlier on, the cost of gas, oil, energy prices going through the ceiling, people terrified about how they're going to live through the winter. Is this just a massive diversion from stop people thinking about wanting unified Ireland, stop people thinking about going against corporations, because everybody now at the moment seems to be so intent on how the hell are we going to stay alive this Christmas, how the hell are we going to get through the next 6 months if everything keeps going the way it is, and nobody is tackling the obscene profits energy companies are making. It's almost like it's almost like it's keep everybody afraid, and they won't think about the real things that are happening behind the scenes.
no, I don't think so. I'm not saying that I don't think so. I've always believed in never look for conspiracy where incompetency provides an adequate explanation. So, one, you're looking at incompetency, and then the other thing that you're looking at is people say the system is broken. It's not. The system is working perfectly for the people who own it and control it. And we are paying the consequences. Because the majority of human beings are fairly decent animals, not half as bright as we think we are. You know, they talk about human intelligence, most of it's a myth. We have maybe a cadre of intelligent human beings, and nobody believes them till they have to, and then they copy them. But the number of people who really have no idea what's going on in the world, and that's part of our education system. It's particularly part of our culture, and it's part of comfort. You know, if you get to a certain degree of comfort, you don't have to think. You know, you don't have to think the same way you do have to think when you're not sure whether you'll make next week's rent or not. So I don't think that it's a diversionary tactic. They don't care. They don't care who dies of hypothermia. They don't care who lives on the street. And if you look globally, you can see it. Like we're worried from a global perspective. We're worried about things that are the everyday means of survival for people in other places. If you look at Pakistan at the minute, Pakistan has a crisis at the minute, which is a climate crisis. But that climate crisis is built on people who have lived with what's beginning to worry us as a way of life. You know, and they don't care. I mean, the people in Pakistan don't care. That, you know, as Jeremy Corbyn, were he here, would say, that few, you know, who are not the many, they don't care. They know. And they don't care about this planet either. They might as well destroy the whole planet if the alternative for them is that they should not own and control the wealth, the means of production of wealth. And I think one of the things in terms of government and constitution that we forget is the age-old debate as to whether the government as paying, you know, you're really far down whenever we're back to paying as being the centre of gravity as opposed to Marx. That's how far back we've been pushed. But governments are the agents of capitalism. From the fall of the Soviet Union, like it or not like it, there has been no oppositional framework to challenge them. Because nobody has looked at China or anything else. But the Cold War, that kind of idea of seeing some alternative system of organising in operation. And I just would like to point out at this point, like just the same way the poor Queen topped it before we ever did get the Constitution sorted out, I had just about figured out what the hell the left were talking about between the degenerated worker state and state capitalism when the whole thing fell apart and the conversation stopped. I never got over that. So if you ever want a long conversation on whether Russia was state capitalist or degenerated worker state, I'm your woman. I've been sitting looking at the two sides. So no, I don't think it's a diversion, but it is diverting us. It is diverting us. And one of the things we have to do is protect, in as far as we can, the people most vulnerable to what is happening there, while at the same time not allowing ourselves to be drawn solely into pulling people out of the river. And it's not an easy task. Horses for courses. There are people who can do that and be supported in that. There are people who can fight the campaigns and be supported in that. But there also has to be somebody bring those two things into the same stream of consciousness. And that's the bit that's
I could see a hand
work.
over there.
It's work.
In the gloom somewhere. Was you had a question? Yeah, they're leaving now.
Thanks so much, Bernadette. I suppose my question kind of follows on from what you were just saying about cost of living as a kind of, that idea of it as a diversionary tactic. I'm after travelling from Kilkenny, and I just got a text that Simon Coveney and Fiona Gale, who are down for a Thinking Kilkenny, has been run off the streets by council workers. Fantastic news. People are organising, the working class are mobilising, and we need to get with the programmes as a very, very practical level for a lot of us as activists. Last night, people are so angry over the cost of living. There was a cost of living coalition, Sinn Féin, Kathleen Funchion spoke at it, and it was organised by Adrian Wallace of People Profit, and there was over 50 people. 50 people turned up to that. There were some right-wing elements and a lot of racist rhetoric in the meeting, but that was shouted down by a lot of working class people that were just, having none of it. But today, we literally saw about 40 people mobilise and run ministers off the street. What I was thinking is, across the 32 counties, we have seen so much progression with repeal, with marriage equality, the power of mobilisation and collective action to unite everyone on our commonality. And I suppose if we're to
Right to water.
at right to water as well, everything about us, with the housing crisis, with the people, the council workers, many of them are also farmers who couldn't afford to actually continue on with their farms. They're working two jobs, the same farmers who were on the picket lines with us, with migrant factory workers who are being exploited during COVID-19. And I suppose, all of these struggles, they intersect, they overlap. And my question is really, if you could give us any kind of thought on that, a practical thought for us to walk away with, to strategize in our own communities and mobilize on that, that would just be brilliant.
Well, I don't have anything new to say on that, because none of that is new. Every time we have had, that struggle goes on every day. And when people begin to mobilize and act, even in small ways, people are educated by the action themselves. They are educated by the action. They learn more. I mean, whenever I was young and started in the civil rights movement, it was because I realized it affected me. I did not get up one morning and say, oh my God, today I will save the world. It didn't happen. This is the day I will be revolutionary. There was a moment in which it becomes concrete for you that you need to change this because you will go under if it doesn't. And that can be a collective you, however small it is. But people are educated through active engaging. And the old, the old thing that people used to say, what will I do? Tell me what to do. Dig where you stand was the slogan of the 60s. Dig where you stand. So if you're a person who's a student, then start organising where you are. If you're a council worker, organise where you are. If you're working in the refugee population, organise where you are. But all the time you organise with people. You can't organise for people. And you can't move any faster than the people you're organising are moving. And there's a dynamic and an understanding that you can really only get by doing. And that is figuring all that out. There's a dynamic in action around the work and around the practice and around the thought and around how you keep it moving in the right direction. And the rules about that are simple. They're about organising, and I think if there's any lesson we learnt, is organising and do minimal harm to the people you're trying to organise with. And I think sometimes around the campaigns we have won, there's a weakness in all of them. Is that you win the ground, but how will you hold it? How will you hold the ground that you have won? And we're talking just before the meeting, it's hard work. It's boring work. The bit of the day of the demo is a great day. But spontaneity takes organising. I think I stole that line from Vichy in Brighton. I never forgot it. But spontaneity takes organising. And organising is boring, hard, everyday work. The bit says easy. That's my favourite bit of all. Connolly said, educate, organise and agitate. We all love the agitation. That is the real fun bit. Out on the street and get your head beat in. But the boring bit is organise and educate. Because organise is not, to organise is not the same thing as to campaign. To campaign is to propagandise. And to organise is an entirely different skill. And we're very good at agitation and propagandising. We are very bad at organising. We talk about our trade union movement. It never was weaker. It never was smaller. And it never was as badly led. So that's a good place to start. As my husband says regularly, this would be a good place for a trade union movement.
Well, Chris, you wanted a question, didn't you? But I'll come back to you if you don't mind, because there's somebody at the back there. Do you want to ask?
Yeah, the grassroots organising part, but if you were talking to young people who care about an issue and want to get involved, do you think that kind of the party political electoral system we have is capable of being a vehicle for change?
Sorry, do I think?
Do you think that the political system we have, the party political system, the electoral system, like, would you encourage young people to get involved? Do you think it's capable of being a vehicle for change?
I'm not sure why people, and I'm going to put this diplomatically, I think, Chris, I'm doing my best here. I'm not sure, because I am sure, how people got to equate political activism with electoralism. I'm not saying that you shouldn't be in elections. Sinn Féin should be giving master classes on elections and using electoralism. I'm keeping watching you to see where you're taking it. I have my eye on you. But when you say about young people getting involved in politics, there's almost an unwritten, at the minute, even in the left, that will end up with an election campaign, and you know, another one of the left into the Dáil or the council or whatever. I'm not saying there's anything wrong with that, but that's a very singular piece. And if you are involved in that, you know, you need to be sound on the fundamentals. You need to be knowing what you're doing, because you are going into the bear pit to be seduced, to be transformed. And it's a very simple way of working. You need to get into the election to get the voices heard. Then you need not to lose the vote, because then you need to get more populist to stay in. And then you need to join one of the bigger parties so that you could be in government. You know, if you look at the destruction of the Labour Party, Tony Blair started that nonsense about, you know, you can't win if you're not in government. So who took the strength of the working class movement out of Labour and into electoralism? The only thing that working people actually have en masse that we can control is the withdrawal of our labour. That's the only thing that we control. Because it is the labour of, you know, that's the fundamental, is that what makes the world go round is labour. Nothing else. So government and all of that are mechanisms. But they're not the only mechanism. So we've been pulled into that concept of if a person's going to be active, should they be in some of the political parties? Why? I was in a political party for all of 11 long months. Jesus, was it hard. It was such a traumatic experience. It is not a mistake I intend to make again. And I'm not saying that's a good thing. It was good for me. They're not the same thing. So if I was saying to young people about organising, I would not be advising any of them to organise or to get active or become involved with a long-term view of joining a political party. You don't need to. Look like you're useful and all the political parties will come looking for you. All of them. When they need somebody to stand for the election, somebody to speak at a youth conference, they come around and you get to be friends off first. And then you can get to be, you know, associate off. And then if you're good enough, the Politburo or the inner circle or whoever it is will come for you and you'll have to do the test. And if you pass, you'll get to be a card carrying Oh, a card-carrying member of an organisation that has pretensions to govern or has pretensions to lead the revolution, which is a bit unfortunate because a revolution will not be white. So you needn't be thinking that you'll be leading it. But young people just need to be encouraged. I have great hope in young people because the young people that I see are passionate, more open-minded, less hidebound about prescribed ideologies that they should hold, more genuinely global in their outlook and interest. And so if they are passionate and cared, they just need to be encouraged to be active and brave. Because I don't think I've ever seen, like we were naive, and maybe that's why we did the things we did. But I have never seen so much anxiety as I see in young people at a personal level. Almost every young person I know is riddled with anxiety, is less confident of their inner being than young people of my generation. If I was saying what's the difference, it's not politics. It's, and maybe because the world has now moved on another, descended worse. But I think if young people are encouraged to be confident and be brave in their own thinking and action, then there is your activist base. And with the grace of God and Her Majesty the Queen, very few of them will join political parties with the purpose of being elected.
And on that note, Chris.
Sorry, Chris. Oh, he's good, isn't he? See the way he walked you into that?
It's actually an extension of a previous question. It's about building a broad front. And I suppose that's what Left Bloc and all is about, and why many of us are here today. It's about the urgent need to build a broad front. I agree that we're moving from that phase of national liberation into social revolution, and we continually need to build that. Reflecting on your own experience, maybe reflecting even from different parts of the world, what are the tactics and strategies we need to develop? Is it a case that we need to build actual collective structures? Is it a case that we need a new spirit of generosity, that we need to avoid falling into the pit of sectarianism? What do we need to do in the years ahead to ensure?
Well, in terms of these, apart from degenerated worker states and social capitalist states, the other abiding mystery of faith of the left is united fronts and broad fronts. God be with those days when you could sit at meetings, and first left-wing meetings I used to go to, I took a note and wrote down all these phrases and words and people's names that I'd never heard tell of, and then I used to go home and think I'd better look them all up before I go back in case I look stupid. Thankfully, they're not so much like that now. Again, I think it's as difficult as we want to make it, and it can be a lot easier if we want to make it. I don't think, particularly in a time of crisis when things are being done, or two, in terms of solidarity. So solidarity and moving on to shared and combined action, for want of a better word. That the first conversation is about structures. I think if we had around shared work and shared visions, if we had more about solidarity and keeping the bus moving down along the road, what really makes it difficult is political self-interest and the need to control. That's really what makes a difference. And it doesn't matter whether you're in a group that, look at the left and I'm not excluding Sinn Féin from the left in that sense, that broad progressive, the social progressive side, the left of centre. I'm talking about the organised left. The Judean People's Front, the People's Front of Judea, is the only thing that ever comes to my mind. And I love you all dearly. But what delusion of grandeur creates on an island this size the permutations and combinations of organisations with about 50 card-carrying members if they're lucky. What is that? You know, I'm a card-carrying member of one of 50 organisations, all of which have 50 members, which is 2,500 people, but we don't really have time to educate the people on the basis of capitalism because we are too busy educating them on the importance of understanding that the other 49 groups know bugger all. Now, the non-purists over here, in case you hadn't noticed, these guys over here with the Marxist, not Marxist lurking amongst them, a couple of left-wing social democrats, maybe the odd trot. Do you know what? They don't care. They don't care. They're just keeping the bus moving where they want the bus to go. And, of course, all the left, never mind all the right, are saying they've got no principles. Got no, I don't know. They do have principles. They're different from yours. They mightn't be taking us all. I'm not too sure where they'll be when push comes to shove. But we'll see. We'll see. But if we're going to spend the whole time in an argument between them and you, which is where the argument now is, the argument is between them and you, meanwhile, sitting with their feet on the dispatch box is the right wing. And people say, oh, here's a big hard question. Will the 50 organisations on the left, if it come to having 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 assorted left-wing principled honourable members, would they push these guys into power and be corrupted by doing it? Or will they sit and force them into the opposition along with them so they can expose their weaknesses while the right wing govern? My money's on you doing the latter.
Okay.
So that's the real question around what are we doing. So it's do what we have to do separately, but know when we have to do. As I'm going to mention them again. I know that certain people did wonder what the political parameters of the discussion was, and said, I know what he said about and the tankies and the conference and all. But to quote Comrade Trotsky once more, I don't know whether he said it, but I always had a sneaky suspicion that Eamon McCann made it up and said Trotsky said it. But the revolution has mucky hands. And, we need to know what the principles are, but we also need to know where we're moving and where we're not moving from and where we're moving to. And so there are some tactical questions that should not be mistaken for questions of fundamental principle.
We have a question up there in the front row, up at the top, and then I have another one just behind you, but I'll come to yourself first of all, and then behind you. Go ahead.
Thanks, Stephen, and thank you very much, Bernadette. You had mentioned earlier on in your talk that the right are obviously having, or the capitalist class are having a conversation about what they would like capitalist United Ireland to look like, and an equivalent conversation isn't being had, or maybe to a lesser degree, but probably isn't being had by those who would oppose that vision. What are the elements, or the most major element that should be being discussed as part of that opposing vision?
So what is that? Just what is the question?
What are the elements, or the major elements, that should be being discussed by those who would oppose the capitalist vision that is being moulded by the capitalist class at the minute behind closed doors? What should we be talking about? What's the most major element?
You know, if we're starting a question on what are the principles by which, that first question is, what are the principles by which we want to live? What should the society in which we live basically look like? And I don't think there's a big, in the population, that there is a big argument about the vision. And there has to be a conversation then about how do what are the core elements needed to make that vision happen before you get into all the nitty-gritty. And in a way, we're very fortunate. We are an island. No man is an island, but we are an island. And therefore, the boundaries of the island and its islands are easily seen. And it being our island, in terms of all the people who live here, has never been disputed by anybody other than the capitalist class of England. It's quite unique in a way, because we're small and we're sitting out here next to America. But I think if I were to say, look, a very simple vision is that the people who live here, that's the people who are here, not talking about the people who can trace their ancestry here back by 3 generations or 4 generations. The people whose presence is here want to live in a place, or should live in a place, where everybody has enough to eat, where everybody has an individual sustainability of person, where everybody has an opportunity to be the best they can be. That's not hard. That people can have access to health and housing and clean water. Now, if you were saying, trying to imagine that vision at the minute in Pakistan or India or almost anywhere in the poorest regions of Africa, you'd have a very uphill climb. But if we start about fundamental resources first, it rains here every freaking day, in case nobody had noticed. The wind blows every single day. So we could build our energy resources. We could and should be self-sustainable in energy. There aren't enough people on this island. Lots of other places people say there's no room. Send no more, there's no room. We have just look around the country. There are more empty houses sitting everywhere, derelict houses. I exaggerate because I enjoy it. Half the population of Irish America owns a derelict, useless piece of overgrown ruin somewhere. They don't need it. So, it's that kind of conversation. Do we want a country where we have a universal health system? And again, it's not new. There are aspects of what we want that a left of centre social democratic Labour Party was able to put together at the end of the Second World War. Jeremy Corbyn's manifesto is not the revolution, but makes sense and could be done in the context of Britain. A nationalised, the resources of the country belong to the nation and should be organised efficiently, not outsourced to private profiteers.
Bernadette, can I ask
People agree with that. So, these aren't big, complicated questions. When we set the vision out, we know that in order to do it, we require an active state that governs for the people and not for the financial interests. Now, bear in mind, as with anybody else who has tried to do this, they will come for us. They will come for us when this constitution is written. They will come for us when these guys and that's when they'll be going to the test. When they come for us in government, what will we look like?
Is that stuff that should be enshrined in a constitution? The right to a home, the right to free
Yes.
healthcare, the right to free education. Because
If you study some of the sites, and it's not the best in the world, I'm not saying, but we could do worse than look at people who have attempted to do this. I'm not saying then that's great. You can look at elements of the South African Constitution. You can look at elements of where other people have started to do that work. You could look at the Communist Manifesto. You could do a whole lot of things and say, how do we translate that into governance? But you have to start the conversation. And I think you have to know that we're talking about a need to nationalise the resources in order to meet the need. It's as simple as that. We need to nationalise the resources in order to meet the need. When I stood for election and was surprised to get myself elected, that was the second time, not the first. It was a shoe-in because it just was a head count. And we had only a unity candidate. And then by the time it came my turn again, the church had decided that the people would need to be told it was a very bad choice. And they put up a wee churchman against me, and I actually won that election. And in that election, I called for the cancellation of the national debt. And I'd say if we're going to start a new Ireland, that will also be a call. Cancel the national debt. I think we have to enshrine the rights of people to be in trade unions. We have to say it is the duty, it's a constitutional responsibility of the state to ensure that we do not have people living on the streets, homeless for want of a roof over their heads, that we do not have children who have no education, that we do not have people in emotional stress and poor mental health without resources, that we do not have people in the midst of the 21st century dying of diseases that are curable. None of this is hard to think of. It's the getting there that is work. And then we have to realize that it isn't just us, because it will be considered an act of violence and terrorism, as it was in 1918, for us to democratically decide that we want in 2022, 2025, 2027, a socialist republic. And if we work towards that, rest you assured, Joe Biden will be after us if he's still living, or whoever comes, whoever comes after him. Our special relationship with the exiles fraternity in America will come to a rapid end. There's no doubt about that.
Okay, I have another question just up the back there. We're coming to a bit of a close now, so if there's anybody who has any other questions, there's one there that need to be very brief ones, okay? So I've got one, just yourself there that put your hand up earlier on, and then we'll come to yourself next. But we need to keep them brief at this stage. With people waving over here as well. So what we'll do is we'll take your question, and I'll come back and I'll take the other questions together and give Bernadette a chance to sum up, okay?
Can you hear me okay?
Just a wee bit, just a...
Okay. I just want to ask, in terms of the Constitution, so I agree, I do think that it would be wonderful for the country to have a rewrite of the Constitution, and I think it's needed. But Ireland's Constitution inspired the South African Constitution. It inspired the Indian Constitution as well. It was very radical, a bit Legion of Mary radical, okay? And quite a conservative Catholic today. But if you look at the Article 45 Directive Principles of Social Policy, which were entered into the overall constitution of the South African one, and also in India as well, they took those kind of socialist principles and put them wholly into our constitution. And Ireland also has its natural resources are for the state, which could be interpreted with Article 45 for the benefit of the people. The problem for me is not actually the constitution. I think we have quite a radical constitution compared to many other countries, particularly the UK. Personally, what I think is actually happening is that there's an international constitution. There's the World Trade Organization, there's a GATT. You have removal of empire from countries, decolonizing countries, but not a decolonization of international law or the international regime. And so I'm asking you, what countries should we work with internationally, or organizations should we work with to fight against that? I don't think it's the Irish Constitution that's a problem.
Yeah.
Sorry.
I'm not disagreeing with you in terms of saying, look, that the Constitution is totally unfit for current purpose. It is rarely used. It's rarely used. You know, how many times has anybody gone, other than myself, to the court, to the Supreme Court, to the High Court, and argued that what is happening to the homeless is unconstitutional, that what is happening to prisoners was unconstitutional? I actually used a section of the Constitution, walked into the High Court once, and a High Court judge basically told me to get out. And I was aware that the Supreme Court was sitting across the way, and I went and sat in there, and just at the very end, I got up and said, "Excuse me, I just wish to say that I have been thrown out of the High Court for raising this issue under this section of the Constitution." And the Supreme Court judge thanked me, actually, for waiting till there was a break, and then more or less said, "Yes, thank you, just leave that with me," because he couldn't be arsed setting up another Supreme Court hearing. And then I was instructed to return to the High Court in the afternoon, and the High Court heard what I had to say. Now, because it was only me, myself, and I, very shortly after it, they moved to remove the protection of that bit of the Constitution for suspected terrorists. And everybody said, "You're crazy." And nobody really in the South took any interest because they were northern terrorists in this southern court I was defending. So we don't use, that's what I meant, we don't use the Constitution. But a Constitution that was written in 1938 and has only been tinkered with after mass campaigning is a Constitution that is unfit for the new purpose. And if for no other reason, I'm not saying that there aren't elements of the Constitution that would cross over. The reason I'm doing this now is because I'm looking up to talk to you and I'm literally being blinded. You see, I should talk to you over here even though you're over there. So I'm not fundamentally disagreeing with you on that point. But you're right about then when we come to, what's the international consequences around that. And again, if we want to see how far to the right we have moved, the international laws are there, the international protections within the United Nations Charter of Human Rights, the social, economic protections are there. But people, look at the UK. Look at Ireland. The governments walk over them. Government walks over what they don't like. You know, what we don't have in our Constitution at the minute is is neutrality. And we're going to have to push for it before we're dragged into NATO. So in a way, I understand your question, but if we are starting, I tell you what we're not starting to do, because we won't be having it. There's an old Irish proverb that says, a Tyrone woman would not buy a rabbit without its tail, lest somebody sell her a cat. and this Tyrone woman is certainly not under any circumstances being absorbed into an existing Irish republic and made fit into it with a bit of tinkering around the Constitution. We will build a new nation fit for purpose in the 21st century that will serve the interest and the protection of the many and not the few. And that will require the building of a socialist republic. Simple as that.
Okay. I think I've three more questions. I think there's two people over there, yeah? One, so two more questions then. Oh, do we have three questions? Okay. Okay, these are gonna be really concise questions, and they're gonna be really good questions, because they're gonna be the type of questions that it's gonna allow Bernadette to sort of sum up. So there's no pressure. Okay, we'll start with you at the end there.
No pressure. Thank you, Bernadette. I was wondering, you've mentioned like the fractious nature of the left, and you mentioned as well like these powerful interests that don't need half the stuff they have, if not more. And we're trying to get to like sufficiency for everyone. And you've mentioned as well like learning through action. And I'm wondering what have you learned about, I suppose, changing the discourse amongst these different groups, amongst ourselves, amongst the many, who are often split, and making them focus, or allowing them to express their needs in a constructive manner to achieve what we all need.
In a sentence, grow up is what we all need. The water's rising round our ankles. The world is falling apart. How difficult is it to see that and to recognize that the most important thing that we need to be dealing with is not which particular section of the left has the catechism right. How hard is it to figure out that's not the most important question at the minute? That's what I would say to that. How I don't honestly, totally get how difficult this question is, but that's because I'm a maverick on the outside. I don't get it. if you look at what's happening, if you look at, I said, when I hoped that Jeremy Corbyn would have been able to join us, and I said the question I would ask Jeremy Corbyn and me is that between the two of us, we have nearly a century of solid activism between us. Have we figured out anything we could share that would be useful before either or both of us die? Or Mother Nature takes her revenge on the human race? That's the question I would have asked us. And then I thought it was inappropriate to ask us that. Right, of course, the Queen stole the thunder on that question and died, and Jeremy didn't get here. But I think that is the question for all of us, is can we learn quick enough, build quick enough, act quick enough, and change the reality quick enough before we reach a point of extinction of the human race. Because, and it won't all die out, of course, because we keep talking as if the planet is going to be destroyed. It's not. Not. Climate change will wipe us out with great hardship and great pain. But the planet will still be here. And you see those old ruins I was telling you about, the people who live in America. That nature will outlive humanity. And maybe part of us, we have this whole conversation around saving the planet. What an arrogant race of people we are. We're trying to save ourselves from extinction. That's what we're trying to do. Save the human race from being virtually fucking wiped out by its own ignorance, stupidity, and everything else. And if we understood the question like that, then we might all rephrase and rethink the issue of how much we need to feel in control of, as opposed to how much we need to work together to change. Because it isn't the Judean People's Front as opposed to the People's Front of Judea that is creating the crisis in the environment or the crisis in water supply or the crisis in the cost of living. It is the unquenchable greed and need for power of less than 1% of the human race who hold power. And getting it off them, believe you me, won't be easy, because this isn't a moral debate. And then the only effective weapon we have at the end, the only way we can actually stop them is when we stop. When we stop providing the labor for what they do. Or when we organize people so that they understand that we can do that, and they will. You know, whether we do that through building governments that are prepared to take them on, whether we do that through building trade unions that will take them on, they will come for us. And then we'll discuss the question of pacifism. I don't think it'll need much conversation.
I'm just sitting thinking, grow up or we're heading for extinction. That would have been a great place to finish. But I've committed you to one more question.
All right.
I can't,
He's not really guilt tripping you, but fire away.
So if you can do that all again, just one last time. Okay. Question from the back.
It's okay, the answer to this might be grow up. So, so I guess how do we get the cost of living coalition
constitutional conversation there about giving the example of this is what a new United Ireland can be, and that will address the crisis that we find ourselves in.
Are you asking me, can you, while fighting the cost of living, create some kind of exemplary that then you'd say this is what it looks like?
Using it as the opportunity, as bad as that word might be, to start the constitutional conversation within our working class community that are most struggling.
Oh no, sorry, you're back to that question. I thought you meant.
We get those groups to be brave enough to do it.
I don't think those are hard conversations to start, depending on how you start them. You know, they're not hard conversations to start when you aren't giving people the answers, when you're asking them the question and then listening. Because there's nobody can tell you better about what would sort the problem than the person who's suffering from it. So nobody could tell you what actually, in concrete terms, what it would look like. I'm not talking in abstract theory, but what it would look like to sustainably have a roof over your head. And what would need to happen for that to be real for you than the person who's living on the street. Because I hold those conversations every day, people who live on the street. Gramsci's intellectuals, they are. They know everything. They see everything. And when you'd say, look, I've found a house for you, they're the person who would say, yeah, but I'll not be fit to that'll not last for a week. You say, well, why not? And then they can tell you something else that actually impacts on that, and they know that that's why that won't work out. And they're very honest, because it will probably be that they will, if I'm having that practical conversation, people say to me, no, that'll not work, Bernadette, because I'll forget. Because of maybe an alcohol addiction, I'll forget. And then I'll be sanctioned. And then I won't get my benefit. And then I'll be in rent arrears. And then I'll be thrown out again. And then I'll be intentionally homeless. They know all those practical things because they have to survive them. If they're an economic migrant, they'll say, no, that won't work because that landlord will sell that house and I'll have to move again. You know, there's no point in me moving my family there because that's a private rented house and that landlord will sell that house and I'll have to move again. So the people know more. Now, then it's up to the people at the next stage, you know, who are listening to those conversations to know what kind of policy do you put in place at government level that would stop that happening. So that kind of conversation is a very easy conversation to have. But if you have a conversation whereby the conversation is not a conversation, it is an opportunity to educate the public on the great workings of the revolution. People say, Christ, oh, I wonder if he's going to stop before the pub shuts. So what can the people in this room do? Lead more, control less, and learn to speak plain English or plain Irish. And listen to people. Listen. Okay. That's what I spend at meetings like this a lot of time talking. I spend most of my working day listening. That's why I'm so fucking smart. Thank you. Good night.
That's great. That's comrades, thank you very much. One more time for Bernadette McAliskey. A round of applause, please.
Thank you very much.